The call came on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had just finished watering my tomatoes on the back porch, and I always water them on Tuesdays and Fridays. Small detail. But that's the kind of thing you remember when everything that comes after changes the shape of your life. My daughter's voice on the phone was flat in a way that frightened me more than crying would have. Crying I could handle. Flat meant she'd gone somewhere inside herself I couldn't reach easily. "Mom," she said, "I need you to come." "Where are you?" "Nashville." "The airport." "I have Caleb." I set down the watering can. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She started to say something about not wanting to be a burden, and I said, "Sweetheart, stop talking and wait for me." Then I hung up, picked up my purse, and walked to the car. I want to be honest about what I felt during that drive. People expect a mother to feel panic, or rage, or heartbreak. I felt all of those, but underneath all of it, sitting quiet and still like a stone at the bottom of a river, was something I can only describe as recognition, like a part of me had been waiting for this call for 3 years, not wanting it, not wishing it, just knowing, the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. I had known who Renee Whitmore was long before my daughter married her son. I found Vivian at the Delta arrivals terminal, standing near the automatic doors with a rolling suitcase and a backpack, and my 4-year-old grandson on her hip. Caleb was asleep with his cheek pressed against her shoulder, mouth slightly open the way little boys sleep, like the whole world is perfectly safe. She had protected him from whatever the truth of that day was. She'd kept it off his face. Vivian looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. She probably hadn't. She was 31 years old, and she looked, in that moment, about 17. That's what cruelty does to a person. It finds the youngest, most undefended version of you and puts it right out in the open for the world to see. I took the backpack off her shoulder without saying anything. She let me. In the car, she stared straight ahead and talked to the windshield more than to me. She told me that Renee had called her into the office that morning, the family real estate development firm where Vivian had worked for the past 2 years, managing client communications and property listings. She said Renee had been sitting behind her desk with a woman from HR and a printed letter, and that she'd pushed the letter across the desk and said, "This isn't working out. We'll mail your final check." When Vivian asked why, Renee said, "You were never the right fit for this family. Not for the company, for the family." And when Vivian went home to the house she and my son-in-law Brandon had been renting, a house owned, I should mention, by the Whitmore Group, she found that the locks had already been changed. Her key didn't work. Brandon wasn't answering his phone. She'd had Caleb with her because it was her day off, and she just stood there on the front porch of a house that had her furniture and her clothes and her son's toys inside it, and she couldn't get in. A neighbor finally let her sit on their porch while she called me. I drove and I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, this was planned. The timing, the HR witness, the letter, the locks. This wasn't a bad day or a family argument that escalated. This was a decision that had been made, communicated, and executed. Someone had decided my daughter's chapter in their story was over and had simply turned the page. When she finished talking, she looked at me for the first time since getting in the car. "I don't have anything, Mum. My job, my house, my Brandon won't even answer my—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. I reached over and put my hand on hers. "You have Caleb," I said, "and you have me, and I need you to trust me for a little while, okay?" Can you do that?" She nodded, not fully understanding what I meant. That was fine. She didn't need to understand yet. I should tell you something about Renee Whitmore. She built her identity around being the kind of woman who could not be surprised. Immaculate house in Belmead, charity board seats, the right shoes at the right events. The Whitmore Group had been her late husband's company, and when he died 11 years ago, she'd taken it over and grown it into something genuinely impressive. I'll give her that. She was smart and she was disciplined, and she had excellent instincts for property. She also had a very specific idea about the kind of woman her son should be with. And my daughter, who grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Murfreesboro with a school teacher for a mother and a father who drove a delivery truck until his back gave out, was not that woman. Renee had been patient about it. She'd been gracious enough at the wedding. She'd given Vivian the job at the Whitmore Group because it looked generous, and because having your daughter-in-law nearby means you always know what she's doing. But 3 years in, I think Renee had decided that patience had run its course. What Renee did not know, what she had no reason to know, because I am not the kind of person who announces things, was that 18 years ago I had purchased 43 acres of land in Williamson County. I bought it quietly through an LLC my attorney had set up. I paid cash, slowly in pieces, the way you do when you've spent 30 years being careful with money because no one was ever going to be careful with it for you. My ex-husband had left when Vivian was 9, and I'd learned early that security is something you build yourself, in silence without telling people what you're building. The land sat. I leased part of it to a farmer for hay production. I paid the taxes every year. I watched the county around it grow. And approximately 2 years before my daughter married Brandon Whitmore, the Whitmore Group had broken ground on a mixed-use development called Harlow Commons. Retail space, luxury apartments, a boutique hotel. Their flagship project, the one Renee mentioned in every interview, the one they pointed to when they wanted people to understand the scale of what they were. Harlow Commons sat on land that was partially leased from a holding company, my holding company. The lease agreement had been signed by the Whitmore Group's then CFO without, it appeared, anyone looking too carefully at who ultimately owned the underlying asset. Why would they? It was a standard commercial ground lease. The LLC had a neutral name. Nothing pointed to me. I found out about the connection 14 months after Vivian started working there. I was reviewing my property documents with my attorney, just an annual review, and she mentioned that the lessee on the Williamson County parcel had been making consistent payments and had recently requested a lease extension. I asked who the lessee was. She told me. I sat with that information for a long time. I didn't tell Vivian. I didn't tell anyone. I just quietly did not renew the extension request, which left the existing lease in place, but put the Whitmore Group on uncertain footing for anything they planned to build next. Then I waited. That is the thing people don't understand about patience. It isn't passive. Every day you wait, you are choosing, you are deciding that the right moment hasn't come yet, and you are staying ready for when it does. In the weeks after Vivian came to stay with me, I watched my daughter do what strong women do when they have no other option. She kept moving. She enrolled Caleb in the preschool 3 blocks from my house. She started applying for jobs. She got up every morning and made coffee and helped me in the garden and only cried after Caleb was asleep, and even then quietly. Brandon called twice. Both times he said he was sorry, that things were complicated, that he needed time. Vivian listened the second time and then said very calmly, "I need you to tell me what you want." He didn't answer her. She hung up and didn't cry at all. She just stood in the kitchen for a moment and then started washing the dishes. I think that was the moment she became someone slightly different than she'd been before. Grief can do that if you let it turn into something useful. My attorney and I, meanwhile, had been having a series of quiet conversations. The ground lease on the Williamson County property was coming up for its final renewal window. Under the terms of the original agreement, the Whitmore Group had 90 days to formally request renewal at the new rate my LLC proposed, or the lease would revert to a month-to-month arrangement with 60 days' notice to vacate. The new rate I proposed was not unreasonable. It was, in fact, exactly in line with current Williamson County commercial ground lease rates, which had increased significantly in the past decade. If the Whitmore Group were leasing this land from any other owner, they would have been paying more than twice what they'd been paying. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I want to be clear about that. I was trying to correct an imbalance. I sent the proposal through my attorney's office. Standard correspondence. No mention of who I was. I heard about the Whitmore Group's response second-hand, through my attorney, and then later through a woman I know who serves on the same charity board as two of Renee's friends. Nashville is a big city that operates like a small town in certain circles, and information travels. Apparently Renee had been furious. She'd called the proposal aggressive and had tasked her legal team with finding a way around it. But the original lease was clean. My attorney had made sure of that 18 years ago when she drew it up. There was no way around it that didn't involve buying the land outright. And when they made an inquiry about purchasing the parcel, my LLC declined to sell. The offer they made was generous. We still declined. I heard she made the offer 3 times. 3 times we declined. 6 weeks after Vivian came home, my son-in-law called the house. My number, not Vivian's. That surprised me, I answered. He asked if we could meet. I said yes. I told him a coffee shop near my house, a Tuesday morning, and I was already seated when he arrived. Brandon Whitmore was 34 years old, and he had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and the expression of someone who has recently discovered that the ground he'd been standing on was not as solid as he'd believed. He sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I owe you and Vivian an apology." I let him give it. It took a while. He talked about his mother, about the pressure, about how he'd told himself he was staying out of it, but had really just been letting it happen. He said he'd moved out of the house. He said he didn't know what he wanted from the future, but that he knew he'd handled the present very badly. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Brandon, I'm going to tell you something, not to threaten you and not to punish you, just because you deserve to understand what situation your family is actually in." I told him about the land. I watched his face while I talked. He was still the way people get when their brain is processing something it hasn't caught up to yet. When I finished, he said, "She doesn't know it's you." "No," I said, "she doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "That depends," I said, "on what happens next." I wasn't threatening him. I want to be honest about that. I meant it genuinely. What happened with the lease was going to be determined by what was fair, and what happened between him and my daughter was going to be determined by him. Those were separate things. I didn't connect them. But he needed to understand the full picture. He sat there for a long time after I stopped talking. Then he said quietly, "She really did love that company." Vivian, I mean. She was good at it. "I know she was," I said. "She's good at most things she decides to try." He looked out the window. "I've been an idiot." "You've been afraid," I said. "That's not the same thing, but it has some of the same consequences. I won't tell you that what happened next was dramatic. I've watched enough television to know that people want the confrontation scene, the public moment, the look on Renee Whitmore's face when she realized it wasn't like that. My attorney sent formal notice that the lease would not be renewed under any of the terms the Whitmore Group had proposed. The land would revert to month with 60 days' notice to vacate, effective at the end of the current lease period. If the Whitmore Group wished to discuss a new long-term arrangement, they were welcome to contact our office. 2 days later, Renee Whitmore called my attorney's office and asked to speak with the principal of the LLC. My attorney said she would relay the request. Renee called back herself the following morning. My attorney conferenced me in without identifying me initially, professional courtesy, and I listened to Renee for about 4 minutes before she said, "I'd like to speak with whoever actually owns this land." "You are," I said. There was a pause, a long one. "Carol Caldwell," she said finally. Not a question. "Hello, Renee." Another pause. "I see," she said. Those 2 words told me everything I needed to know about who Renee Whitmore was. Not screaming, not crying, not apologizing, just recalibrating, just already thinking about her next move. I respected it a little even then. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted 3 things. I wanted Vivian's belongings from the house returned to her undamaged within 2 weeks. I wanted a written letter of professional reference for my daughter from the Whitmore Group, accurately representing her 2 years of work. And I wanted the lease renegotiated at fair market rate with a 10-year term, so there would be no more uncertainty for either party. I did not ask her to apologize. You can't make a person sorry. You can't only change what they're able to do. She said she'd have her attorney contact mine. They did the next day. I told Vivian that evening. She was sitting at my kitchen table helping Caleb with a puzzle, one of those wooden ones with farm animals, and I sat down across from them and waited until Caleb got absorbed in finding where the rooster went. Then I told her, not everything all at once. Enough. She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, how long have you known?" "About the land. 14 months after you started working there. And you didn't tell me. Would it have helped you to know?" She thought about that for a while. Caleb found the rooster. He held it up triumphantly. "No," she finally said. "It probably would have made it harder to stay." "Yes, I thought so too." She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up at me. "What did you ask for?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment when I got to the reference letter. Then she said, "I don't want anything from her." "I know," I said, "but you worked hard for 2 years, and you were good at what you did. That belongs to you. Your record belongs to you. She doesn't get to take that just because she decided you were inconvenient." Vivian was quiet for a while. Outside the kitchen window, the yard was going gold with early evening light. "That particular Tennessee end of daylight that I have loved my entire life," she said. "How did you know to buy that land 18 years ago?" I thought about how to answer that. Caleb put the cow next to the rooster and patted them both approvingly. "I didn't know anything specific," I said. "I just knew that Williamson County was going to grow, and that a woman in my position needed to own something that nobody could fire her from." She nodded slowly. "I want to go back to work," she said. "Not to the Whitmore Group." She meant in general. "I want to do something real. I know you do. You will." Caleb looked up from his puzzle. "Grandma, where does the horse go?" "Right there, baby," I said, pointing. "See the space? It fits right there. Brandon and Vivian are not back together. I want to be honest about that too, because I think stories do people a disservice when they wrap everything up in a bow that real life didn't tie. They are in the early, careful stages of figuring out whether there is something worth rebuilding or whether the kindest thing is to let each other go gently. He has been showing up. He comes to take Caleb to the park on Saturday mornings, and he stays for coffee sometimes, and he and Vivian talk in a way they apparently hadn't talked in years. Whether that leads somewhere, I don't know. That's not my story to write. What I know is that my daughter laughed at dinner 2 Sundays ago. A real laugh, the kind that catches you off guard. Caleb had done something with his mashed potatoes that was both disgusting and deeply creative, and she laughed until she had to cover her face with her napkin, and when she came back up, her eyes were bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. That's the part that stays with me. The Whitmore Group is in negotiation on the new lease terms. My attorney tells me they've been professional throughout. Renee and I have not spoken again, and I don't expect we will. There's nothing left that needs saying between us. She made a calculation, and it turned out to be wrong. And she is smart enough to know that without me explaining it to her. People ask me sometimes. Well, they will ask me, once this gets out, the way things always eventually get out in this city. Whether I did what I did for revenge, I've thought about how to answer that. Revenge is hot. It wants something back that's already gone. What I wanted was for my daughter to have what she'd earned, and for the people who tried to diminish her to understand that she came from somewhere and someone, that she wasn't alone and had never been, even when she thought she was. I bought that land 18 years ago for myself, but I held on to it in the end for her. The tomatoes on my back porch are doing well this year. I water them every Tuesday and Friday. Some things you just keep doing because they're yours and they're good, and they give back what you put in. I am 63 years old and I am still learning things. But I've known since I was 32, sitting in an attorney's office signing papers on 43 acres I could barely afford, that the best time to build something is before you know you'll need it. My daughter knows that now too. That's enough for me. I've been thinking about what I would say if someone asked me to explain how all of this happened. Not the legal part, not the land or the lease or the phone call where Renee finally heard my voice and went quiet. The deeper part. The part about why. Here's what I keep coming back to. People like Renee didn't become who they are overnight, and neither did I. We were both shaped slowly by the choices we made when no one was watching, and there was no obvious reward for making the harder one. The difference is what we decided to build with that shaping. Renee built something designed to impress. I built something designed to hold. When I was 32 years old and signing papers on 43 acres I could barely afford, I wasn't thinking about any of this. I was thinking about my daughter, who was 9 and losing her father, and about myself, who was 32 and losing a version of my future I'd planned for. I was thinking that I needed to do something real with what little I had, because no one was coming to do it for me. That wasn't bitterness, that was just the truth, and I had learned by then that the truth, however uncomfortable, is always more useful than the story you'd prefer to believe. That's the first thing I'd tell anyone who asks. Do something real, not something that looks real, not something that performs well in conversation, something that actually holds weight when you put it down and walk away from it. Vivian's 2 years of work at that company were real. The skills she built were real. Renee could change the locks and pull the job offer and pretend my daughter had never been there. But she could not unteach Vivian what Vivian had learned. That's yours. Whatever you genuinely earn goes with you. The second thing is harder to say without sounding like a greeting card. But I'll try. Renee made her move against my daughter from a place of fear dressed up as power. People who are genuinely secure don't need to tell someone they don't belong. They don't need to engineer a dismissal, coordinate the locks, and time the whole thing to land on a Tuesday morning. That's not strength. That's someone protecting something fragile. And fragile things, when they're being protected with that much effort, have a way of eventually showing you exactly how fragile they are. I'm not glad it happened the way it happened. I wish my daughter hadn't had to stand on that curb at the airport with Caleb on her hip, not knowing what came next. That part I would change if I could, but I can't. What I can tell you is that the woman who got in my car that day and the woman who laughed at dinner 2 Sundays ago are related but not identical. Something clarified in her, something she didn't know she needed to find got found. That's what I want for her more than anything, not comfort. Clarity. She knows now that she comes from somewhere. She knows that her mother was, quietly, for decades, building something no one could take from either of them. And I hope that knowledge settles into her the way it settled into me when I was 32, not as a story to tell, but as a way of moving through the world. Carefully, patiently, with your eyes open and your name on the things that matter. That's all I have. That's what I'd pass on.